So, I've been giving this a lot of thought. I think I don't hate Watchmen anymore. Now, let's back up. I remember seeing Watchmen, the movie, the Zack Snyder self-indulgent fest in the 2000s in theaters, and I was overwhelmed. I didn't really have a collective memory of the graphic novel, I'm willing to admit that. But it did make me want to go back and read the graphic novel because everyone emphatically said how terrible it was. And sure, the movie does have some parts of it that, in hindsight, looking at the graphic novel, definitely do bother me. But going back now a third time, I think that some of those opinions may have softened. Here's where I still have issues, though. And I kind of want to talk about why I'm talking about Watchmen of all things. I try to watch a few movies a few times a year. I watch V for Vendetta every Guy Fawkes Day every year, and I usually try to watch Watchmen at least once or twice a year. Mostly just because that movie is a huge time commitment, and it is emotionally very draining. But last year when I tried to watch it, around the time of year where things all started to politically kind of go to hell, I couldn't get through it. It all felt too real, and Adrian's impassioned groaning about killing millions to save billions all felt too similar to rhetoric that I had heard by politicians I didn't trust. I could barely get through the film, and I didn't. But recently I found myself giving it another watch with slightly more critical eyes, just critical eyes in different places. Here are the criticisms that I still have. I still don't like the way it glorifies violence. That is one thing that I will say. The graphic novel is actually relatively bloodless, which is interesting. Though that criticism has softened less. It still bothers me, especially with Silk Spectre, that every punch she seems to throw is magic. But as far as like with Dr. Manhattan, I kind of get it. It makes sense that when you're essentially a god, everything would kind of explode into a visceral puddle. It bothers me, but I get it. The way they addressed Ozymandias sort of annoys me, but I get why they had to neuter him for the sake of plot. Again, that doesn't make it okay. I just understand it. Movie had to movie. But here's where I might have different opinions now. I've really sort of turned around on a lot of the things that people give Zack Snyder a hard time for. Mostly we'll talk about slow-mo, montage, and music. Now, Zack Snyder loves him some slow-mo. I remember seeing that very distinctly in 300, and in 300 I didn't hate it, actually. Because, again, it made sense. It was cool to have these sweeping slow-mo shots of Leonidas looking amazing and doing things that are physically impossible. I think Watchmen does the same thing, surprisingly. I really didn't think it did at first. But it does, and the way he uses slow-mo in time to really make you feel like you're in a comic book is actually really fascinating and something that I wish more people talked about, as opposed to just making fun of it for being Zack Snyder-y. The way he uses music as well is really, really interesting. Each musical choice is a little bit on the nose, but when has on the nose really ever been that terrible? Well, I mean, Suicide Squad, but we're not here to talk about that. I still love that cover of Hallelujah, even though it's a weird scene. Didn't need slow-mo there, but good song, weird moment. I think especially where this movie gets me is length, honestly. It's still way too long. This honestly could have been at least 3 movies. I don't understand why no one stopped him. And to think that, honestly, the cut that everyone sees is still like an hour shorter than what he really intended scares the heck out of me. Who let him have this 5-hour movie is my question. And realistically, it makes sense. I mean, the Watchmen graphic novel is not short, but You gotta cut things. Sometimes you have to cut things. Scenes definitely do go on for too long. I think we spend way too much time with certain characters. We spend way too much time with the first Silk Spectre. We spend way too much time with the old heroes. And we don't get enough time with these new characters because then by the time we meet them, we hate them. I'm gonna briefly gush about Dr. Manhattan because I never thought this day would come, but gosh darn it, I love Dr. Manhattan. And this movie really sold me on him. Weird blue nudity and all. That really bothered me, I think, my first watch, maybe because I was immature. And also because it makes it a movie that's, like, hard to watch ambiently. You can't, like, throw that on in the background. It's a little bit too heavy and a little bit too visually distracting. Because they spend a lot of time on that animation. Someone really had to work on all that anatomy. And you feel for him, you feel for that computer graphics editor. But by keeping his dialogue the same that it was in the graphic novel is wonderful. It's a sublime choice, and it gives a voice to a character who is sometimes really hard to understand and to empathize. And by showing him as kind of cold from the start, it sort of forces you to deal with him. Because I think that's the issue that a lot of people are having with him in the comics now. As you get to the Button, that really, really big DC crossover event in the comics, is people don't understand him. He's just essentially a god. And it's like, well, yeah, that's sort of the point. That's kind of the point. But being able to see him like that, and to see him already sort of be jaded and cold and tired and frustrated and annoyed and just over it, actually really kind of helped sell that character for me again, even though I had very, very little issue understanding him at first. I empathized with the comedian for the first time, which probably says a lot about me. They really did a good job with that character, but I mean, considering who his actor is, he's played the same character about 5 times and does a great job every time. I also don't hate how dry Ozymandias is as much as I just complained about it. I get it. And his plan is stupid, but it's less comic booky, so I understand why they had to change it. One of the major criticisms is that they changed the ending. I'm kind of glad they did. I can't imagine that an interdimensional space squid would have sold to a mainstream audience. Hell, it didn't sell to comic book fans. So as, weird as it is to talk about the things that you lose in adaptation, that's one I'm kind of weirdly okay to lose. And it makes his plan all the more heartbreaking, because then it's his decision. It's not hoping the space squid is bad, it's I've done a bad. Except for his weird CGI tiger. I don't like that. I don't like his weird tiger. Plot-wise, as a movie, I understand why people don't like this. It's very convoluted. And you have the most unreliable narrator in Rorschach ever. But I will throw in 2 cents about Rorschach. I think he's very high on the list of characters that I feel like people say they like, and they don't understand the implications of what that means. So when I say that, like, I respect and I understand Dr. Manhattan, and I empathize with the comedian, and I understand Ozymandias, I know those implications, and I know what that means for me. I think a lot of people are like, yeah, I really understand Rorschach. Okay, do you know the baggage that comes along with that, is my question. If you do and you understand, cool, fine with that. Have your weird, kind of speaking in rhyme, vigilante murderer. If you don't, take a minute to really re-go over the source material, because a cool design and gray morals do not a good person make. But the movie is really visually interesting. Even in all the places that Snyder changed from the graphic novel, and even some of the narrative decisions that he made, except for a lot of the stuff with the Silk Spectre. I don't know how he managed to ruin her. I'm not in the business of blaming actors or actresses. I'm in the business of blaming writers. She was given nothing to do. Malin Ackerman was given nothing to do. I think she did the best she possibly could with a really, really bad script. and she's surrounded by other characters who are essentially playing pieces of wood, very, very angry pieces of wood, and she did her best. So I'm never going to be the person that blames the actor or the actress. I will mostly just blame writing. And I mean, it's a movie full of female characters that are very, very poorly written. And you could probably blame a little bit of that good old Alan Moore sexism, but I don't think Snyder's aesthetic helped with that at all. And I will say this, making it a movie did just sort of bring out a lot of the issues that I already had with the graphic novel. Again, that good old little touch of Alan Moore sexism. You think just because he writes a lot of female characters that he wouldn't have those problems, but I remember The Killing Joke, and I remember how sexualized that was. Almost like that's intentional. You see a lot of that as well in Watchmen, and then you see Snyder mimic a lot of those things. So when you have a cracked foundation, you build a house that's already sort of sloping. Yeah. I didn't think that it would be this movie that I would end up kind of softening on. I didn't think that it'd be Watchmen that I ended up softening on. But it took, I think, about 3 to 4 watches before I could finally say, tentatively, I think I like this movie. And by I like this movie, I would like to really not watch it again for another year and a half. There are several things that I enjoy that I don't watch regularly because they make me uncomfortable, or because they make me feel things, or because they make me think too much. Again, V for Vendetta is very high in that category of thing I watch maybe once a year. But I think a lot of my feelings on Watchmen, the movie at least, have changed. I'm curious now to go back to the graphic novel and see if I still have some of those ghosts past of dealing with those characters that I have now reading a lot of Alan Moore's work. And if you guys want to hear me talk about Alan Moore, let me know in the comments, because I could have a whole other very long audio session about how I feel about The Killing Joke. So if that's something you want, let me know in the comments below. But I did promise that I'd do more thoughts and more reviews and more critiques, and doing it this way is actually pretty easy for me. So if there's anything that you'd love a good solid, I don't really want to call this a deep dive, but a good sized dive on, feel free to let me know in the comments, and stay tuned. Thanks, guys.